There you go, joining me to get us up to speed on today's theatrics in the wind in Westminster, talkTV's political editor, Kate McCann. Kate, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. You all right?
Yeah, I'm fine. Everybody talks about detail. I'm gonna start slightly differently. From your gut, how did he do? Is he going to get away with this, the famous greased piglet, or is this committee going to bury him forever and his political career?
I think the committee, by the sounds of some of the members today, have decided, listening to Boris Johnson, that he did not tell Parliament accurately what he understood at the time. Now, Harriet Harman said today that some of his defences were flimsy. Other committee members repeatedly said to Boris Johnson, you should have known that when you addressed Parliament, you were not giving full and accurate information. In fact, the former Prime Minister, at one point seemed to concede that if he had explained his argument as he did today, then maybe none of us would have been there listening to 3 and a bit hours of evidence today in that committee hearing. Now, that's not to say it's the end of Boris Johnson's political career, because remember, the committee can sanction him, but if they suspend him for anything under 10 days, then this doesn't end up going to a recall vote. And there are many, many people inside Parliament and without it too, who still believe that what Boris Johnson did or didn't do inside Number 10 during that time wasn't as bad as all of that. I think, though, when you listen to what happened at committee today, and Jeremy, I think you're right not to necessarily focus too much in on the detail. The reality is that Boris Johnson believes, no matter what anybody says, that he was entirely right to attend the leaving dues of those colleagues. In fact, he said, until the day I die, I will still believe that that was the right thing to do, because in his mind, he thinks the rules were followed and he did as much as he possibly could to follow the guidance. The question is, for many who didn't attend the funerals of their loved ones and who felt that they did have to stick to it rigorously, whether that will be enough of a defence.
Interesting. Tom Newton-Dunn, I just bumped into him in the corridor and he said to give this to you, that essentially Boris Johnson only ever has his hair cut when he's really, really in trouble. Explain what happens now in terms of the process. What happens next? Because that committee's been quite vocal. Harriet Harman said he's guilty already, and Boris Johnson's side have said, no, this is not right. What happens in the next few hours, days and weeks, Kate?
Well, the committee can decide to recall Boris Johnson for more evidence if they feel that they haven't got everything they needed from the session today. They ended earlier than we maybe expected them to, so perhaps they won't need to have him back to give any more evidence. But they can go and ask for evidence from other members of his former team, and that might be crucial here, because one of the points that Boris Johnson got particularly frustrated during was questioning around what his aides had said to him, what advice he had been given, not just on the rules, but on whether the guidance was followed. Now, that might sound like the same thing, but it isn't really, because he told the House of Commons that rules and guidance were followed just after he'd been told by a senior aide that that point on guidance might not be as watertight as he perhaps first thought. The committee could go and ask them for more evidence. They probably will have to submit to all of us to release some of the evidence that was given to Sue Gray during her investigation. That's something that Boris Johnson wants the committee to do. They'll take the next couple of weeks to go over what they've heard, and we will likely then see a decision. But don't expect it any time soon, because they have to give Boris Johnson 2 weeks' notice before they publish that decision anyway. So we could be waiting for 3, 4, maybe even 5 or 6 weeks until we hear back from the committee formally on what they've decided after today.
Kate, thank you so much indeed. From windy Westminster, Kate McCann, talkTV's political editor. Next, I'm delighted to be joined by Lord Jonathan Marland, a supporter and defender of our former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Again in Westminster. Jonathan, welcome to the show. Can I just ask you, as a friend of Boris Johnson, did he hold his own today, do you think?
Yeah, I think he did, Jeremy. I would qualify that I'm not a supporter of Boris. I've known him for a long time. I'm an observer of what's going on. I thought he did extremely well. And actually, I thought it was rather an unseemly event, but he was being prosecuted effectively by 7 lawyers. And this is a rerun of what the police have already been through and what Sue Gray's been through. And I'm not quite sure where this is all going, I'm afraid to say. It didn't throw up anything new. I thought Boris was very plausible in his response. I think he gave a pretty good feel of what was going on in Number 10. And having been a minister myself, you do suddenly get told, oh, by the way, there's someone you've got to say goodbye to, and you're ushered into somewhere, and you actually don't have the time to think of the consequences. So I sort of understood that, having been through that myself. I do, however, recognise, and we mustn't at any point ignore the fact that Boris is a divisive character. There are many people, and in fact most of us have all suffered not just inconvenience but some terrible hardship and loss of family, etc., when we get to this point. We must recognise that this process must also be responsible to those people.
Absolutely.
And on the other hand, there are many people who think he's absolutely brilliant.
Do you believe yourself?
Sorry, Jeremy. Yeah.
Do you believe yourself? Because it's this phrase, isn't it? Misled Parliament. He says not recklessly or intentionally. He says that the information, hold on a second, the information he was given by his aides was inaccurate. And you're absolutely right. He is a divisive character. And whatever happens today and in the weeks ahead, there will be people, I'll meet some of them next, who would hope that he never graces Westminster again. But there are plenty more people in this country who think that, you know, the remaining side of Great Britain and other people are just out to get him. What do you think will happen? What's your gut instinct?
Well, obviously, I can't predict these things. What I hope will happen is that he is rapped on the knuckles and told not to do it again. But I honestly believe that he didn't. I honestly believe what he said is true, and I don't think he would ever have set out to deliberately mislead Parliament. He's not actually that sort of guy. I mean, he has many faults, don't get me wrong, and it's unfair for me to say that. We all have many faults, but that is not one of them. And so I believe him on that. You're completely right with your analysis, as you always are, Jeremy. You've been seeing this as long as I have, but I felt it was rather an unseemly process today, and frankly, those that are either ambivalent or are friends of Boris say, surely we've moved on from this because we've been through the police inquiry and we've been through the Sue Gray report. And I hope that in the end they recognise he was doing an absolutely horrendous task in this storm of COVID in a building where, you know, most of the time he wasn't allowed into the rest of the building because of social distancing rules, had to sit in his office on his own behind plastic screens for 1 or 2 weeks, that he himself suffered and nearly died from it. And I think genuinely everybody in number 10 was trying hard to solve this problem. And the problem with rear view mirrors and hindsight, it always throws up these sort of things. And I think they need to look at it in a balanced way.
I agree with that. Just to take you back to what you said about the committee, our friend Jacob Rees-Mogg said that the Privileges Committee makes a kangaroo court look respectable. I mean, which is quite an interesting comment. Can we trust this? I mean, you know, when you've got Harriet Harman saying he's guilty before they even begin the process, if we go with what you're saying, Lord Marland, that actually mistakes were made, he's not perfect, it was a very difficult time, an incredibly difficult time, why don't we just move on? It just, to me, strikes me as if certain people will not let go until they bury him once and for all. Do you agree with that?
I think that's absolutely true. I think it's diabolical, actually, that the chairman should come out with that statement before hearing his evidence. Actually, I think it's entirely wrong that they should have released an interim report without having interviewed him, which I think does the committee a disservice. There are some very good people on that committee, by the way, but I don't think that was at all attractive and is totally unfair on him. You wouldn't get that in a court of law. And this is acting as a court of law. It's the only job in life where if you've done something wrong or supposedly illegal, that you're being held up against political opponents, and in some cases, because we know that the Conservative Party has often been very badly split, jealous colleagues, rather than a judge and a jury who, in theory, are impartial. So I feel sorry for Boris who's having to go through it. I don't feel that sorry for him because it is made through that, and I also recognise the incredible suffering and the desire of a lot of people to see him, for those reasons, to be buried. But this has got to be done in a dispassionate, unpolitical way without bringing one's own sentiments into the judgment. And I think she diminishes her chairmanship by saying that.
Final question, Lord Marland. Always lovely to have you on. If he's suspended, if he gets a rap on the knuckles, if there is a by-election or not. Will Boris Johnson walk away, make his millions from his after-dinner speaking and his books and all that? Or is there still in his heart this fire to win back the seat and continue this political career that for many people, and I'll meet some of them next, you know, they probably find it abhorrent, but there is something, I don't know what it is, that people in this country have always attached themselves to Boris Johnson. Do you believe he will walk away, or do you think he will fight for another day?
Well, he's a young man. Obviously, compared to me, he's a young man. He's a very young man. You know, politics, when it gets into your veins, it courses through and you can't really put it down. And I think your other guests will say very much the same. And I suspect well, I know he loves politics. He loves the cut and thrust of it. And actually, funnily enough, he likes serving. He also likes being the centre of attention too, as I think we also know. So I think that he will be, well, I hope he won't be lost to politics. I think a large amount of the population hope he won't be lost to politics. He has been a reference point for the last 10 or 15 years, certainly for the Conservative Party. You know, everyone said, what is Boris up to? The media are fascinated by his every move. He can, quite rightly, go and make a huge fortune. But my sense is he's never really been that interested in money, per se.
Well, I'm not sure whether he's not interested in it or not very good with it. Lord Marland, listen, an absolute pleasure.
Point.
Thank you so much
Thanks, Jeremy.
for joining us, my friend.